And the thing that came through in the conversations, but also that she was so complimentary about her history with Dr. Kagan, and everyone that's familiar with him, was his passion. He really, the heart and soul of who he is comes through. And he was just sharing with me, he has 39 years of experience, and a huge majority of that is related to home-based work. So he knows what it is to be a practitioner doing home-based work, and his core roots, he also said, were similar to ours that John was mentioning yesterday in residential. So that's kind of where he's coming from. He provides consultation and training on treatment of complex trauma and developing trauma-informed service systems. He served in executive leadership, experience in nonprofit and family services as Director of Professional Development, QI, research, and psychological services, and has served as the principal investigator for 2 SAMHSA-funded National Child Trauma Stress Network grants. I might add that he's also included as one of our staff for the future, for the grantee that we just received from SAMHSA. So he'll be helping us in a very specialized perspective. Dr. Kagan has also served on the NCTSN Steering Committee and is an NCTSN affiliate advisory board member. And then he's also served with their complex trauma and child welfare committees. And he's co-led the development of the NCTSN curriculum, Caring for Children who've experienced traumatic stress. He was formerly the Director of Research and Consultation for the Sidney Albert Training and Research Institute at Parsons Child and Family Center in Albany, New York. And that's been a community NCSTN services site since 2002. Dr. Kagan's presentations, articles, and books highlight practical and innovative approaches that practitioners and organizations can utilize to help children and families strengthen resources, their resiliency, and reduce their traumatic stress. He said publications of 44 articles, chapters and papers on practice and research, issues in trauma therapy, child welfare, foster care, adoption, training implementation, program evaluation, and quality improvement, and 10 books, including the Real Life Heroes Toolkit for treating traumatic stress in children and families, which I know has been in national focus on the media at different times throughout your history. So thank you so much for being with us. Give Dr. Kagan a good welcome.
Thank you for saying that. So what that means is I've been out to families, and then the next week our staff couldn't get back in the door. So I've learned from families, and I've learned from colleagues, and I hope today to learn more from you. And I'm already learning a tremendous amount at this conference. I'm just really impressed with what you're doing here with the FCT. I will get this, and I'll master this. So thank you for having me. So. I also was really delighted that Tim said I could talk on this topic because I love assessment. I'm a psychologist, and I love the process of engagement and assessment, and the idea that assessment is something that's ongoing and that we learn a lot about ourselves and our families from. And not everybody wants to hear about it. So I know in FCT you take the first 30 days, but not, let me tell you, all audiences do not want to hear this presentation. So if you want to leave, please go. You may want to go, but we'll have some, this is supposed to be a workshop, and I understand I had 2 hours. So I was thinking we would do workshops and would actually have you work on some materials. That's why I have the handouts. So we'll have you turn around in your chairs and we'll do what we can. So if anybody wants to sneak out and say, you know, it's not for me, I understand. But I really appreciate being here. And I'm hoping today to talk about, I'm going to move this so I can see my slide. I want to talk about some of the challenges in this process. I know you have an 86% engagement rate. I heard about that in the earlier presentation, which is amazing and really impressive, because I know what it's like doing home-based work and doing also doing behavioral health work. in terms of engagement with that than the rates are in the country. So I'm going to think about that, and I'm going to think about using a trauma-informed lens and also an attachment-centered lens to do this work. Let me know if I'm coming through in the back. Yeah, great. I want to introduce a little bit about the model that I developed, which is Real Life Heroes, which stemmed from our difficulty implementing CBT approaches in a lot of the models we had to try to engage the families that were referred to my agency, the Parsons Child Family Center, where we had 26 different programs, and we served, step back a little bit, we served thousands of kids, and about 99% were involuntary. They were forced, they felt forced to come to us, so we had a no reject policies also like you. And our biggest challenge was to engage them and hopefully to make them into partners with us. They certainly were not clients when they came in any way. And therefore a lot of the models that I brought in as a training director just didn't work. So we had to modify, and that's what I've tried to do in my work, and I know you've done here successfully. So I'll talk a little bit about that in some of the other ways. And mostly I want to talk about tracing pathways to healing with some of the talent from the families we see. And some of the things I've learned, and then I'd like to have you think about how you might use that or not use that with your own work. And so I'd like to have you begin, because my belief is in training that if you just listen to something, it's probably pretty worthless, even if it might be fun for a little while. But I hope you'll think about it. So one of the things I had one of the handouts is a worksheet. So you probably weren't expecting this. But I was hoping you could put the name of one child, one family you're concerned about right at the top of that sheet. Just think about it. It might be your newest referral. It might be the referral that you're just about to pass on to one of your wonderful staff. Just do one child, one family. Just think of the name, put the name at the top right now so we start thinking about that. Because as we go along in this workshop, I'm hoping you're going to think about, well, maybe I could take this and use it with this family, or maybe not. So all along. So put that name down. Then I'm going to think about these kind of kids and families we get. So the kind of kids and families I was working with, and I think you are too, given your population, are the kind of kids when you try to do an evaluation with them, with the youths themselves, they say things like, I'm not telling you nothing, I'm not talking about A, B, and C, Mom, Dad, what I did, I don't draw, I don't do, like tests, surveys, papers, anything from researchers from the University of Maryland. I think that stuff. I can't control my anger. I have parents that I throw things. So she looked at the big old rusty metal Tonka truck we had on the floor, and that's So we want to take an approach with this. Didn't you read my file? Do I have to do this? Or I'm borderline. I'm bipolar. This is the saddest thing, because that's a lot of the kids we would see where I work, where they already have been in multiple psychiatric hospitalizations in New York State, and they learn their diagnosis. And they could write down 30 ways they can control their anger, and then a couple weeks later they were back with the police and back in the hospital, and afterwards sent to us. So our choice is we I know you framed this in FCT very well. We can welcome these tests, or we can see them as welcome these tests as opportunities, or see them as resistance, and that's our choice. So what I want to ask you, and I've been extremely privileged in my work at doing thousands of assessments, and have so many kids disclose to me. And I'm sure that's happened to you too, because you're all experts in this field and you're out there doing this. And I want to know, what I'm really curious about as a researcher, the research side of me and a clinician, why is it that a youth who's had 12 therapists and 4 psychiatric hospitalizations and placements and prevention of placement programs and then discloses to the 13th therapist? And that's what I'm really interested in. And that's what I want to talk about today, and this thinking about this privilege we have to go to a family, to listen to a child who doesn't want to talk to you, or a parent who doesn't want to talk to you. And but we have a privilege to engage them and hear their story and learn from them and benefit from that ourselves, and how we can honor that as a privilege. So I want to think about some core things about assessment first, to begin with, and some hypotheses. And I guess the first one is that it begins with each of us. It's our own emotional status and well-being that frames our ability to work. If our cup is overflowing already with stress from home and work and a COO that's about to fire our staff or others we like in our agency, then it's very hard to do this kind of work. So we need to be in a good shape, and we need to have a framework, a lens, how we see children and families, how we see ourselves, and where we are in our own relationships. And that's something that we usually don't address in this work, in this field, in our field, the field of child welfare and behavioral health across the country, even though we give lip service to it. I want to think about, and I know you already do this, because you frame it this way, but assessment is the beginning of the engagement process. But not all places do that. Instead, they do the mandatory, state-mandated, I know where I worked in New York State, state-mandated forms. You have to do that first. And when you go to an agency or program and say, well, what about doing something else? They say, no, we have to do the state-mandated form first. And if we don't, we're not paid. But oftentimes there's a lot more flexibility than you may think. Because I want to think about those first words. Actually, the first words by the receptionist, the first words by the first person that answers the phone from your agency, because that sets the tone that a parent or a child hears and starts the relationship. And what we're talking about with, I'm focusing on complex trauma here, and I'll be talking more about that this afternoon. But we're talking about these are relational traumas. That's what we heard yesterday with Dr. Johnson. These are attachment breakdowns. These are things about people not being able to relate. And I'm talking about the parents primarily, and the grandparents often, and the great-grandparents, and the children. It's multi-generational. I know you know that in FCT, but not a lot of policymakers understand that process. So I think about it from that perspective. So I'm moving quickly through these. I did send the PowerPoint. So is that available to them if they want to get that? It's uploaded. So I'm going to skim over a lot of these slides. If you're interested in more about it, it's available to you online. I use this as sort of a reference so I can skip over things. And also to help me keep me on track. So that's why I have the PowerPoint. But I also want to think about assessment as a chance for us to change the paradigm that the children and caregivers and the grandparents, any grandparents in this room? All right. Have about service providers like ourselves. It's a chance for us to demonstrate respect instead of more shaming. It's a chance to really make client-driven treatment real instead of just some kind of slogan. And it's a chance to really get them to set their own, the family to set their own goals. And I know you do all that. But to really make that real. And it's a chance to uncover pathways to healing rather than continuing old patterns involving service providers. Because most of the families we would see, and I'm pretty sure you're in the same position given your referrals, they've already seen many people like us, whether it's 2 or 5 or 22 already. And so they're already expecting something that we would do and how they can invoke us to play out that drama with us in certain roles that we may not want to get into. So with a trauma-informed perspective, of course, we're really thinking about safety from the very beginning. And we're thinking about the safety so that children and caregivers and ourselves can share some vulnerability in order to be able to make some change. So I begin with an introduction, and I'm sure you all have something you've used successfully. This is what I use. I want you to think about how it works. I always say thank you for coming. I tell everyone there's nothing you have to tell me. This happens as a psychologist role where I might have an hour to do an evaluation with a 17-year-old who's been sent to a residential treatment facility or to our home base, alternative to psychiatric placements. And I have very limited time to talk to them. So I'm going to say up front, I ask nosy questions. I learned this from my colleagues. I'm going to counter you to let me know if there's something that's too hard to talk about. So I said to start off with obviously a paradoxical message. because obviously I want them to share things with me, but they know, and I know that they know that I'm going to ask a lot of nosy questions, and they've already been asked these questions, again, by 10 previous therapists and psychiatrists and psychologists, and they might have got injections or pills, multiple bottles of pills, so they don't really, there's hardly any trust. Because I know I have to earn that trust, and I can't demand it, and I want to set that paradigm, and by saying that message, I free myself. How many of you say a message like that, paradoxical message, about the nosy questions? Because I know you're trying to get a lot, so it's not you're allowed to. Good. So I want you to think about your own messages, your own safety message, and how we want to tie that in, because it's that first message that we across that is really important. Not that they're going to believe it, right? They're going to test it, and we want them to test it. And we want to welcome that test. So that's one we get that across. Next thing I want to bring up is developmental. I'm always thinking developmentally. So that mother who's looking at the Tonka truck, she's at one level of development, and she's telling me, and I want to thank her for this, because she's telling me I throw things and looking at the metal truck, the heavy metal truck, rusted. And that I want to thank her for that, and learning. And so I'm thinking also, where did she get stuck in her emotional and social development, and how can we engage her? So we're trying to engage the child and the caregiver at their developmental level, and then thinking about how they would experience messages we give, and our agency gives, and the people that sent them to us have given them. So I want to think about those kind of words, the words we use. Like, how are you doing? Which in America, Americans say that a lot. But when I say that where I worked, what do you think? What do your kids think of when you say that to them? What?
Have I messed up again?
Yes, exactly. That's right. And are you going to get in trouble? How bad? You're thinking, how bad am I doing? And then go. Boom, we're off. And our whole any time together is all focused on how bad the child is doing, and how we as are going to focus on that, and maybe try to fix them, and they won't be fixed. So we want to think about the developmental level of each person, and then also I want to think about in complex trauma therapy, we really want to think. We're always thinking multisensory, multimodal. So we want all the body senses, including balance and position. And as Dr. Johnson talked about yesterday, I use the same things about the Latin root of emotion. We're all saying the same words, I think, across in the field, the cutting edge of the field, is that emotions are movement. Emotions get blocked when you experience traumas. So part of the work in trauma therapy is to free up emotions so that they can flow. Because when you have a little 2 or 3-year-olds watching mommy and daddy fight, and mommy pulls out the knife and she stabs daddy and the blood comes out, for a 3-year-old, that's death. Blood is, you're going to die, and it's a life force, and the little boy or little girl is frozen. That's when your development stops. And your emotion, because the child wants to run to mommy and daddy, wants to stop them, wants to hug them, but they can't, or maybe they're told not to. And that's when the emotions get stopped and blocked because of the fear and terror of harm. That's what we're talking about in PTSD and trauma, so we're stuck. So what we see when they come to that same child who was 3 at that time, now comes to us at 17, and they've been doing all kinds of stuff that got them in trouble in their community. Our job is to sort of track those emotions and try to see where they are and think developmentally. So if a 17-year-old's acting like a 3-year-old, like a lot of the kids I would see, the kind of kids going in psych hospitals and residential treatment in and out, then that immediately, and where I worked, and I think you are in the same position, to get that 86% engagement rate, we immediately have to go where they are, or we lose them. We have a few sessions, and we use the same messages, and I think you say something similar to, you were sent to us by, that's how the families would come to us, by the county. But there are other agencies in town that do home-based work. So you may want to tell your worker you would rather go to, the other agency across, a few blocks away. And because we want to empower them and put ourselves, take a step down on the pedestals we might be put on. So we're tracking emotions, we're using multisensory, and one of the things I want to bring out is an assessment is we want to have some tools some little tools. In 9/11, I was so, one of the things that struck me so much was the firemen that went up the towers. What did they have to protect them? They had the stuff on their back, they had their training. It didn't seem like a lot to a lot of us, but that gave them that courage. What do you have? What do we have to go out to a home with barking dogs and other things? Last night we were talking about scabies and lice and things like that. All the other good stuff that adds what scared me the most. And but we have some tools, and we want to have the tools, some tools to be able to help these kids to share with us. And that's what I think about a lot today, and have you try out a couple of them. So next thing I think about in terms of assessment and also complex trauma therapy, we're always strengths oriented, and we're always trying to uncover what often are the hidden talents and interests and caring of the child and the caregivers, because they get blocked. You have these really talented, we all know these really talented kids, and it could be great poets and maybe artists and musicians, and we want to try to bring out what they're interested in, because we know for all our kids, all of you that are raising kids know this, we're trying to bring out what they can be successful in. And that includes strengths in the family and in their family heritage and in their cultural heritage, which often gets lost, especially in America. Especially in this country, we tend to lose that. So I want to bring up just a couple more points on assessment. It's multiple, we want to think about multiple sources of data, different perspectives that on the child, from the teacher to the physician to the county workers. Mentions ongoing. And we want to use some standardized tools. I know you're already using the FAD, and then you have some of your own tools that you're using, which are really great. And that gets into pragmatic. What's practical, given the time that we have, which you have actually quite a lot. A lot of programs I worked with in New York State, behavioral health, Medicaid funded, we had 3 45-minute sessions, and then you had a contract. So that was it. To do it. So really, bing, bang, boom, and you had to do the state mandated forms and in there. So very tough. So you have to, it sounds like you have 30 days often, and that's really interesting. You have a lot of sessions to do that, so that's much better in terms of engaging. But I want to think about everything we do in terms of the real life context of the work that you're doing. Next thing I want to bring up is metaphor. So something I always think about is that since kids and families often coming to us, it's been often been many years, and they've lived a long time with what's often the unspeakable. Bessel van der Kolk, one of my mentors, talked about PTSD as unspeakable terror. It's we can't say. You see that in the MRIs. It's the words are not coming out because the kids and the adults learn you can't say those words. So we want to. So often they're expressed in different ways. So like this youth going 30 days in foster family care, and his mother is missing, and his father is abandoned, and I have to do an assessment on him. And so he has to come to see me, and he draws this picture, and he's going in the dark cloud. So I'm really looking at what does this remind you of? For me, it reminded me of the Maurice Sendak book about where the wild things are going off in the boat. So we can use these things, and just as a reminder of maybe where we can think of going in terms of a strength, or also in terms of what the child is sharing with us and all their skills. Like this boy, which I can't know if you can see very well, but this guy's eyes bulging out, and he's leaning forward. So let me start with that, because this is an assessment workshop. So one of the things we do in assessment is we want to take on the body position of the child. So if you're willing, and don't do this too hard, but I'd like you, if you would be willing to stand up and take this boy's position. If you're willing to stand up. This is not a sit-down workshop. This is a workshop. Thanks. Now you're going into the dark clouds. So imagine you hold this, and what's going to happen as time goes on is the 10 minutes and 20 minutes and 1 hour and 5 hours, and it goes. Okay. All right, thank you. Thanks. So what would happen if you did that all day long? You'd get tired. And you might fall out. You might fall out. But this boy, as you can see, this is a pretty remarkable boy for, I think he's like fourth grade. So he has a lot of words for a lot of the kids that I would see. He can write words, and he has bananas. Some of you should mention a diet, and diets and successful diets. You could live on bananas, got potassium, a lot of good stuff. So he's stocked and he's ready to go, and what we can use this as a metaphor. He's going on a journey, and I think that's what therapy and treatment is. It's a journey, it's a pathway, it's a story. So, and assessment and engagement is the beginning part of this journey, maybe into a new world. Because when a child and a family come to us, or we knock on their door, and they actually let us in or talk to us at the doorway, then it's like an invitation to start a new journey. Now, if you think about that, so it's like a journey and a pathway, and that's some of the premises of Real Life Heroes. So we can think about like Joseph Campbell's metaphor of the hero's journey. And therapy or treatment programs as like inviting a child and a family to embark with us on this new journey. And where are we going? So we can have, again, assessment, of course, has multiple goals. For where I worked as a psychologist, primarily the reason they had me do the assessment was funding. And find everything bad about the child, even though the system of care said we're totally strength-oriented. But we only fund what's terrible about the child, and I'd say otherwise we give you no funding, or the least funding possible. So we get all these paradoxes going on as we do an assessment. But we're trying to develop hypotheses, we're trying to get going, and we're trying to find more information. And we're really thinking, I want to think about this as a learning process and a journey of discovery. And that we are like detectives, and we're like to engaging them, and we want to help them to learn together. And I appreciate the fun that we just mentioned. So we want to make this into something that was fun. And so what I'm looking for, and I'm really looking for, and I think what means a lot to most of us, and all this, obviously you're interested in people and caring, is what makes a child smile? What makes a mother or a father smile? What lights up their face? What brings out their caring? What could rekindle hope in a family that appears despondent and given up and depressed and turning to drugs or stealing or other things to get by? And I'm really looking for these kind of openings that we can find to engage that child and family and to build. And what way can we tap into the strengths that are often hidden way behind the horrors and terrible things that their families experienced from their past. So that's what we're trying to look to. So there's an old expression, if you want to know the simple truth, listen to what is not said. So I want to think a lot about trying to listen. Dr. Sullivan talked about yesterday about listen and be present. So we want to listen to the unspoken. We want to listen with our eye. We're obviously listening to the body movement. But it's these emotional interactions, this process that gets flowing out, and also involves people like us. How we're pulled to play a role in the family, and with the family. And these things are hidden in the referral. So this is in common NCTSN. You see the little banner on NCTSN at the bottom. So now you're a funded member of NCTSN. So you are NCTSN now as of October 1st. So hopefully you'll go to the website, nctsn.org, all kinds of wonderful resources there. Hopefully you already are going there. One of those is we talk about the trauma-informed lens. But I'm thinking about that also in terms of resiliency and attachment. And then when we think about we're always asking the question, what happened? Dr. Sullivan, Dr. Johnson yesterday said the same question yesterday, going to the what happened, and then, and I'm thinking, because we're always talking about relationships, we're talking about what and who helps from that resiliency perspective. So we get referrals. See, I like to use this old study from Dustin Medical, 1994. So that's not only for somebody like me, but for some of you it may seem a long time ago. But this is a great study in terms of educating. Some of you may have the opportunity to educate policymakers. This is a great study. So let's say they're thinking about what affects children, because this is what gets neglected. Is the impact here. So I always I ask this, frame it this way. Let's say you had a baby. How do you raising a baby now? Child? All right, one, two of you. Okay, great. In the front row, 2 guys too. So let's say you really want to mess up your child. You want to, you want to make them, because you learned about all this stuff, right? You love to see them dissociate, have poor self-respect. 40s, there's no such thing as a child alone. There's a baby alone. Every culture in the world teaches this, but our policymakers don't know it, don't understand it. At least in New York State, they didn't get it. In South Carolina, where I'm living now, they don't get it. It's like it's always a child and somebody, whatever age. And if you're 40 or 45, you're always you and somebody. So I'm thinking about my father now, and my children, and my grandchildren, and a lot of us are having all these different kind of things we're thinking about. After 9/11, I had a child at NYU, law school, and a daughter at Columbia. So what do you do after 9/11? What did everybody do? You're up picking up your cell phone, right? To call. Our cell phones are down. But the thing we do is we want to connect after any kind of horror, any trauma. And after trauma, what are people doing? We connect with each other. And when children, after 9/11, NCTSN was founded just before 9/11, but then obviously became very consumed with dealing with terrorism and disasters. So one of the things from the research back then is which children did well. Well, if a child experiences a terrorist strike, what they're doing for a disaster, they're going to look up at the parent person. If the parent person says, no, we're going to call grandma, we're going to walk to the Brooklyn Bridge, we're going to walk out of here, we're going to get to a phone, we're going to call daddy, we're going to call mommy, that child is okay. But if the parent's out of control, then the child is going to be dysregulated also. And of course, the other thing they found in the 9/11 studies was that the children that had the most extreme problems, they'd already experienced murders and deaths and abuse and neglect, and there was really multiple troubles, like so many Americans. So I'm going to keep these kind of things in mind. Emotional abuse, these words we say that lead to shaming, that lead to lack of connection, to lead to the breakdown of these primary relationships. These are the things that really drive some of the worst problems we see, including adults that get diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So I want to keep that in mind. I mentioned development before because I'm really very keenly interested in when the trauma started and how that affects behavior. And we know for most of the youth we see, whether they're 17 or younger, a lot of the traumas are starting at very young ages. And we know these kids, especially around 5, 6, 7. How many are raising 5 to 8-year-olds? Yeah, okay, great. So before you're playing the board games and there's rules and things like that. But I think these children are often very, very sensitive to guilt and shame. And these guilt reactions really build up in these ages, in the ages of 5 to 10. There's a lot of shame, and it may be expressed in different ways in girls and boys. More depression in girls and more rage in the boys. So we know these kids are very susceptible to shame, and then that leads, as Dr. Johnson talked about yesterday, to isolation or being isolated by the family. And then when you're cut off, then you're dysregulated, and then you get in trouble in school, and you're off to it. So I'm skipping around, but I really wanted to pull this together and thinking about this with a focus on complex trauma. This is an old definition, but I like it. It's from Jenny mentioned. It's about complex trauma is when children are exposed to danger that's unpredictable, uncontrollable, and when the attachment breaks down. So it's not, so the child, we talked about the protective shield around every child. That's what helps every child grow strong. And it's when that protective shield breaks down for the child that their development stops. And that includes, I'm also thinking about that for the parents and for the grandparents in their lives. So I want to put this up here. This is, because I'm really glad it's here. This is in the ICD-11. They now have complex trauma. We in the NCTSN complex trauma group worked extremely hard to do a tremendous amount of research to prove that there really was a cluster of factors that could lead to a DSM-5 diagnosis for complex trauma or developmental trauma disorder. Failed again, I know people like Dr. Belnick and others tried the DSM-4, I think they tried the DSM-3, failed again in the United States, this is the psychiatrist, but the ICD-11 has it. So we can use that. In some states, New York, with influence by NCTSN members, have actually provided greater funding for diagnoses of complex trauma, greater funding for mental health treatment. So I'm not sure if you need to use diagnosis, but I thought it would be important to bring it up in terms of factors that you may need to use, and also to think about, because this is worldwide now, what they identify as complex trauma, and then thinking about what does that mean in terms of treatment. Because our job is to think about the antidotes to it, and what are we looking for in assessment. So I highlight some factors I think are key in this definition, which again would be on that PowerPoint if you look it up, or you can just Google it. The exposure to an event or a series of events, extremely threatening, prolonged or repetitive. So it's not just one trauma. And this is where I think it's really important, because the kids in my agency, first of all, it was just like yours, when I was probably less than your 9% sample where I worked. Hardly any work came in with a referral because of a trauma. That was really extremely rare. It was all about the high-risk behavior problems of the child, and that was threatening other people. So it was because of the fine work of our therapists that we get the child to disclose the traumas. And in fact, our children and families didn't meet the criteria of most of the evidence-based treatment models that used to require that you had to have an identified trauma that was acknowledged or validated. Well, very, very rare where I work. But we would get that, and then we could take off with a lot of the treatment models. So, repetitive events where escape is impossible. You're trapped. You're stuck. And that's being a child. And again, a lot of our policymakers don't get that. But we know you do. But for little kids, you don't have anywhere to go. So now when you get to be 12 or 13, you find you can go to the other kids on the street and to pimps and drug users and gangs, and you find other ways to get going. But for little kids, you really have no place to go. And your body and your brain tell you should be going right to your mom or your daddy, and that's where you get a lot of this tremendous dysregulation because of the brain effects. How many of you talk to your families about brains, by the way? Okay, that's because I'm just interested, because that's what big thing in trauma work and real life heroes and most of the treatment models is we want our children and our caregivers and our grandparents and the teachers to know how the brain works. So the brain stem is going to be telling you, no, 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 bald men are dangerous, but if that's my daddy, I was picking at you in the front row, but my daddy, my limbic system, my brain is telling me I need to be with him. He's everything. I love him. He loves me, and I need to be with him. And that's being a human being. I need to be with my mommy and my daddy, those people that are there for me. But if mommy or daddy sometimes act dangerous in an unpredictable way, then I'm also running back and forth, running away from him. And so that's where you get this jerky kind of chaotic behavior that we see with complex trauma. So these core symptoms we see of affect or regulation problems, so the emotion regulation appears to be dysregulated as in they're off the wall, and they're up and down, and seem to be out of control. We have very negative beliefs about themselves, and a lot of shame. And shame is a really critical factor here. Shame and guilt, and failure about themselves. Because the kids at this developmental age, are blaming themselves for whatever happens in the family. Their placements, what happens to mommy, daddy hits mommy, or mommy stabs daddy. Kids often blame themselves, because that's how they're thinking in their brains. And then persistent difficulties in relationships. So this relationship is really critical. And then plus all the symptoms of PTSD, so I put that up here too. This is the ICD-11 definition of PTSD, which I'm sure you're familiar with. It's very similar to the DSM system, with re-experiencing traumas, strong and overwhelming emotions, avoidance, persistent perceptions, and significant impairment in many areas. So in terms of treatment factors, we need to be addressing for complex trauma, if that's what you're seeing in a family, a child in a family. And we're thinking about it in terms of we need to address these three things: the regulation, Affect regulation, so that's that emotion thing, that movement thing. The belief systems, including the shame and guilt, how we address that, and relationships. And America is really a tough place to do this. We lock people up. That's in our national news. And the children are watching that on TV. We're locking up people now. We separated kids and families, locking them up. It's really horrible. And this idea that comes from the British system, too. The people in many countries locking people up as an answer to behavior problems. And kids that go to group care often feel, as I work with, feel like I have to serve a sentence. I'm not going there for treatment. I am there to serve my time, then I'll go home. And that's what they're thinking. So we want to match our treatment to this. We want to think about also how we're going to accomplish some of the key factors in complex trauma. So I want to bring this up from the point of view of assessment. That's why I highlighted some things for assessment. These are from the Complex Trauma Committee, our white paper on complex trauma, in terms of some of the key best practice components of complex trauma treatment. Also from a paper I love by Julie Ford and Marilyn Coitra. I love them, admire their work in terms of what is the best practice for complex trauma treatment. So I just put it together like a simple list. Whatever you do, and I know you're doing these things already, but when I think about how we do that, we want to do that from the beginning, including assessment. So we're thinking about safety, but that safety is not just in terms of a child safe currently, but everybody the child loves. Because we're thinking about that relational system for the child, because that's what broke down. So if the child might be safe in you're in a temporary group home or a temporary foster home, but if brother or sister or mommy or daddy are in danger, that child's not safe. So we're thinking about that. We're also thinking about a relational engagement of everybody involved here. And everything we do, beginning with assessments, is strength-focused and developmentally focused. And we're always thinking about co-regulation. And we emphasize co-regulation, not just self-regulation. Because most referrals we would get where I worked was all about that the child needed to develop skills to regulate his emotions so he wouldn't throw chairs at teachers and things like that. We're thinking about co-regulation because we know in terms of child development, there's the stage in those of you who are raising babies, and you're all for other children, you know that. Who regulates a baby? These two dads in the front row. That's it, right? It's all about the parent. And then the next stage is co-regulation, and then we move to a little higher levels of self-regulation. But the reality is we're always involved. It's always us and other people that are involved in this kind of relationship. So when I think about those primary factors here, I put down some of the other things we want to get to, including the bottom one that we're always thinking about in complex trauma for these kids, which is always that fear and terror of losing your primary relationships. Because we're talking about relational traumas here. And that's a good segue to attachment. Because when we do assessment, we're always focused on attachment. And attachments across the lifespan. So I'm thinking about the attachments from the moms and dads, or the caregivers also. And we're thinking about how the caregiver and the child. And we're thinking that we know that a child has different types of attachments with different people. They might have a very secure attachment with grandma or grandpa, but a very avoidant attachment with mommy or daddy. And so we're thinking about this differential as part of that, and as part of that map. And I know you're doing an eco map, so I want to tie that in. And also tie that again back to the brain. We were thinking in this work, brain to brain. So always brain to brain, least dyadic. And I know you're thinking family, so I'm at least thinking dyadic and who's there for that child. And Ellen Shore, neurobiologist, talked about it as the dance of the limbic systems, the child and the parent. So we're thinking about that part of the brain hooking up, because that's part of what makes us human, as human beings, that we're focused on. So I'm just going to skim over it. How many of you do an attachment assessment? Okay, some of you. Okay, so I'm going to leave these on the slides, so I don't have time to go over them. But most of you have this in your training anyway. But I really want to be thinking about these patterns we all learned in grad school. These different patterns from a secure attachment to an insecure attachment, and how we can quickly assess that in children. So I'm going to cover a couple of summary things here. that I want to look for, because in our work, we don't have a lot of time, but we see that when we first meet the family. So, are they clinging to the parent? Is the child looking up at the parent? Really, the child looking up, make sure mommy or daddy are not getting too upset. Very careful what they say so they don't distress the family. Trying to take the caregiver, that might be more the ambivalent, preoccupied child or attachment with that particular caregiver. Or is it like there's a little or no eye contact and flat superficial response, a lot of looking away or down. You might have a child who's really grown up with a very avoidant attachment where they've learned they're really pretty much on their own and they're not really attached. They have very little empathy or sensitivity to other people, which you can do that. So you all know about the empathy gene, which one of the great things in neurobiology that's come out in the last 10 years. And knowing that that critical stage, that attachment stage we talk about, 6 months, 5 to 6 months to 18 months, this is a gene that can really be, because of what happens around the baby and the toddler, brought out so the child learns to identify, or we can shut it down. We can do that to a child. So these two dads in front, you could raise your child to be a psychopath. We know how to do it. We really know how to do it, and we know it's done. And it's your choice. And but in reality, what happens a lot is that, especially in very tough times, like for so many of our families, they're struggling. The moms or dads are working 2 or 3 or 4 jobs, and they're desperate, and the landlord's knocking on the door. How many of you have been in a family where the landlord knocks on the door in a home visit? I've had that. You're trying to hear your thing, and the landlord knocks on the door. And so you go back to, right, in home-based work, you go back to what's the first thing, and one of the first things I learned after my PhD, of course, and is you gotta have a roof over your head, right? So have a roof over your head. So that's where we are. Okay, so the bottom category, this is most of the families that I would see, which where you have this chaotic, disorganized. Sometimes it feels like in the family they're going to go to Disney World, and sure you can drive to, right? And it's very exciting, and we're going to have fun, and there's lots of love and kissing, and then it becomes violent. And of course you get that with drugs and alcohol tied into the family, which goes back and forth and back and forth, and the kids are like that. So very simple schema I want to think about, because I want to get in terms of assessment, to look at this real quickly, is that with the avoidant families, avoidant child caregiver relationship, we often see, and I want to tie this in right away, a low arousal. In trauma work, we're thinking about arousal level, a body energy level. Some kids it's very high, they're moving, really hyper with certain people. With other people, they might be pretty calm. We're watching for that. So with grandma, might be calm. With mommy and daddy, they might be hyper as anything. And with other adults who look like mommy and daddy, they might be hyper or not. One teacher, they might be hyper. Another teacher, they might be really calm. I want to learn what's going on and what makes the difference. So we get this, with the avoidant kids, we often see sort of detached relationships, low arousal, versus the ambivalent, preoccupied kids, you see clingy, needy, and high arousal, very high anxiety. And the chaotic, disorganized kids, you see this back and forth. And that's why they get the diagnoses like bipolar, which, again, a lot of times psychiatrists feel obligated to give those diagnoses because that's what you need to pay for the psych hospital. Even if it's only 3 days or 10 days before they're sent back to the treatment providers to work with families. So you get these kids go back and forth and back and forth. And if you understand that what's sorry about that. It's a dangerous place to put that. Actually, I'm getting worked up here. So but we go back. They go back and forth and back and forth between that, and we see. Yep. And thank you to the rescue. So, but we see how that fits in the family and makes sense for survival if you're living in survival mode. So this is actually a chart from one of the real life girls who did. Well, for each of these categories, then we're going to think about very different kinds of interventions that are going to match that child and children and caregivers. So for the ambivalent anxious child, we're really thinking a lot about creating more safety and reassurance. It's reassurance. That child might have witnessed and may have strong fears, I'm going to lose mom. Mommy's going to run away. Mommy's going to kill herself. Mommy threatened suicide last night, but I'm not going to tell you because we don't talk about that. Or maybe mommy is really afraid that daddy's going to kill mommy or something like that. And then the avoiding child, we're really working in another different way. We're thinking about a lot of goals and consequences and trying to develop basic sensitivity and empathy that really isn't there. In chaotic disorganized, we're really trying to work in both ways. So I mentioned I'm going to bring up some of the tools from Real Life Heroes, which does use the heroes metaphor to try to engage children and caregivers. And the heroes in Real Life Heroes, by the way, is the adults. We're trying to engage the adults. So I was so impressed with our foster parents, our resource parents, who would take, how many resource parents in here? Right. Who would take, see, I didn't do this, who would take children into their homes with no information about what they did, what happened to them, and the courage of these families to take these kids in. So, and also our caregivers in all of our families are trying to help the adults become the heroes and to re-empower these adults in their own lives so that they can bring out the hero in these troubled children. So in terms of Real Life Heroes, we think about 4 components. Every treatment model has their own acronyms, right? So in Real Life Heroes, I want to think, in Real Life Heroes and for complex trauma, we're really trying to rebuild the foundation. And that's what makes this work so hard. And the foundation is relationships and emotions. So it's who's there for me, who can be there for me, and how do we get that co-regulation of emotions. And then the action is because I was so strongly influenced, as I know you were, by Minuchin, by structural family therapy, and Millennium family therapy, and about the action cycles, the interactive cycles we see, and how we can change some of these interactive cycles. And in terms of the trauma resolution, for complex trauma, we're really not thinking so much about specific trauma desensitization, but rather life story integration, because it's your whole life and your whole identity that's been shaped by all of that. So for these different components then address a lot of things you're already addressing, but for each one. So relationships with safety and attunement and co-regulation, and emotional regulation includes changing the script and affect recognition and action cycles. Really includes a lot of kind of things like enactment. So really trying to create these activities to create different ways the family, child, and caregivers can do different things and cope in different ways. And life story integration includes a life story book and really the idea of moving through the stress to a higher, different sense of identity. I'm just skimming over this because what I really want to focus on is using those core principles. How do we tie that into assessment? So in Real Life Heroes, we take those 4 things, the relationships, emotion, action cycles, and life story, and focus on that in terms of the assessment for the child. So on that assessment sheet that I asked you to put a name on, if you turn to the next page, you see I have a little genogram which is a combination of genogram and my life identity and key events in your life. Then on the next page, here on page 3 and 4 for assessment, really looking at these 3 basic factors. So beginning with what developmental level do you think the child's at? What are some of the goals that the caregiver lists? What are their goals? We already know what the referral sources goals are, and we have to be aware of that, because otherwise we're not funded, or we don't lose our contracts. So, but we want to certainly we want to focus on what the caregiver wants, the child wants. But then I'm thinking about these 4 categories: relationships, who's there for the child, who can we look to, and trying to identify that, emotional regulation, action cycles, what's working, and life story integration. And that leads directly then into pages 5 and 7, where we take the same 4 components to think about what do we do. So this is a little different way of working than you are, and I just want to have you think about it in terms of some of the primary components of complex trauma and breaking that down. So I'm going to think about how do we build up relationships if that's a priority, how do we work on emotional regulation, co-regulation, how do we work on changing those interactive action cycles, and how do we work on life story integration. So use those 4 principles to frame moving forward all the way through the work. But the main thing we're thinking about here with the children that we would see is that not only did you have traumas, but you have this breakdown in relationship. So our goal is to rebuild, refine, find someone. And it may not be the one, the adult who walks through the door with that child. Because we know that that person may not even have raised the child. You might have a 7-year-old that comes, 7-year-old come in and with a parent, and maybe the parent just got the child back in their home after 6 years. And grandma or grandpa were raising the child. So that brings me to my first tool I want to bring up is the circles. So we go off a handout of these circles. This is, I know you're already doing an ecogram, which is much more complex, and it's great. This is really simple. And again, it comes into my work where I have very little time to engage a child. So when I would see a youth, and I would see a lot of 15, 16, 17-year-olds, again, who did not want to see me. And whether they're referred to residential or some other high-risk placement program or prevention home-based program. And what I want to do is change the paradigm right away. So I do my safety message that I already showed you about, I ask a lot of nosy questions, and I'm going to count on you to stop me. And with the kids who are the kind of kids that want to spit out everything about all the horrors and sex in their lives, for some kids or adults like that, then I would really want to repeat that message over and over. I'm going to count on you to stop me because, again, it's pretty much stuff. So I do that, and then very quickly I go to the circles. Now, I want to back up a little bit. So in a behavioral healthcare system where we have 3 45-minute sessions to engage a child in contract, or we lose the case, and required by the state to do it that way, the first session we have to listen to the family, really listen to where they're at. Second session, we want to do some of our little forms and tests. And by the third 45-minute session, we want to do contracting. This is where we see how it would fit with the child and caregiver's goals. So the first session, we're really getting a lot of their goals. When I met with them as a psychologist, and if I have a chance to meet with the child alone, youth alone, the first thing I want, within the first 10 minutes, first few minutes, I'll bring out my circles. This is from Antonucci, 1989. I've adapted it somewhat to some of the different words. So it's very simple, and as I say, so one of the things I would really like to find out is who's really important to you. So in the middle circle, could you put down the names of the kids who are really, names of the people who are really important in your life. So can I ask you which one you want? Tracy? Okay. Trish. So if I could ask you, so Trish with the youth, I'd be saying, so would you be willing to put down the middle circle? People that are really important to you. It'd be terrible if you lost them in the next circle. People that are also important, but you're not quite as close to. And in the outside circle, people that may be temporarily important to you, like a teacher, somebody teach you, help you get your driver's license, or people you'd like to get closer to. So I asked them just to put down the names, or if a child can't do that, they could draw pictures, or they could tell me, put a lot of different ways. So immediately I want to frame the beginning of our relationship again, with the first minutes as, I'm really interested in who's important for you. And most of the kids, again, that I'm seeing, they're expecting to talk about, well, this is why I stabbed, this is why I brought out the butcher knife. How many of you deal with kids with the butcher knife? It's always the biggest knife, right? And this is why the police came, that kind of stuff. So I want to frame it as relationships. Then the next thing I want to do is then I would say, Trish, so then would you be willing to circle the names of the people that you've been willing to share some of the best things you've written your life with and the worst things? So I want her to circle that. So I want to get a clear sense, especially that inner circle. Who can she share the best in her life? Again, I'm very strengths-oriented. The best and the worst. So in terms of that. And the next thing I want to do, and this is the next sheet you have with the thermometers. So I've been using thermometers ever since I started working. This thermometers go back in our field 1956, nothing new. And So I use these, which is funny nowadays, because then I can say, back in the old days, we had these things. And I can't even say mercury, because of course that's poison and our kids drink it when I take it. So, all right. Oh, but anyway, so we would go up and down, and you got the 1 to 10, and kids look at you funny, right? Because that's not how we do it now. Right, dads? Right? You guys are that much better. So, but the first one, so I introduced the thermometers real quickly. So the first thermometer is a stress thermometer. I think about knots, like different metaphors for this, right? Like to have a rope. So one level's one, if I'm having problems with my mom, that'll be one knot. If I'm fighting with my sister, that's another knot. If my teacher yells at me, that's another knot. Pretty soon my whole rope is knotted up and I'm stiff and tight and ready to go. So 10 would be the highest level of stress. 0 would be no stress, perfectly calm, and 5 would be in the middle. And self-control is that I can do what I want to do. And that 10 would be the highest, and 0 would be out of control, and 5 in the middle. And then math's adding glad would be high, get high to low, and feeling safe. And what I want to do is, so I have these thermometers. So then I would take from that circle. So let's say Trish, I'll just pretend. Trish put down, some kids will put down nobody, but they'll put down God in the middle, or my dog. I had one 17-year-old, so it was the dog in the previous group home. That's all she had. Scars up and down her body. And but at least she had that dog. So how many dogs are there? Really important. So I use cats and dogs. And so let's say Trish put down grandma and mom in the center. And then on her chart, on her circle, I'm just making this up, obviously. And then she left out dad, so I know dad's really important. And dad's not even on the chart, and grandpa's not on the chart, and those things. But she puts in the inner circle mom and dad, and she circles grandma as somebody she's shared with. So the first person I want to ask about is grandma. So I want to say, the next thing I would do after we do the circles is introduce the thermometers, and then I would say, so have these thermometers, and make a joke about the thermometers. So if grandma was in the room with us, Trish, in this big, big room, where would she be sitting? So hopefully Trish will say next to me, and or wherever. And then I said, so then I asked her, how would you be feeling on these thermometers if grandma was in the room? So I want Trish to then relay. So what I'm asking Trish to do is give me a emotional portrait of how she feels with grandma in the room. So on those scales.
I have a question. Here on the thermometers, you have on top like beginning, mid, and end. What is the use of that?
Oh, that's for sessions. When you're doing real life heroes, beginning of the session, end of the session. So we can use that or not use that. Because we can bring this up in real life heroes. We might want to use this at different times in the session to get a quick track of where the child's at. So a lot of our work, as we know, what the kids we're dealing with, they've learned they cannot say what really happened. Because when they tried to do that at 3 years old, they said, Daddy was doing sex with me, or Grandpa's doing sex, or Mommy's doing sex. They learn nothing happens, and they get in worse trouble. And so they stop saying what really happens, so they're not sharing. So, and we also know in trauma and PTSD, and the MRI studies, the frontal cortex is not working, the cortex. So they're not sharing the words. The words are going to come last. So I want to have a lot of nonverbal ways for kids, and I'm doing this with the caregivers too, by the way, to share how they're feeling. So I want to say to Trish, to ask her to share without any words how she feels with grandma if grandma was in the room. So I get that picture of how she feels. So here's an example of one youth I worked with. So the knots, this is where her mom, she's in placement, and desperately wants to see her mom. He's supposed to come for a visit. She finds out mommy's in the hospital. That's how she feels. Her knots are higher than her self-control power. This is extremely helpful to us as a therapist because we've gotten now the child has told me at the beginning of the session, and we do this in real life heroes every session. So we are really tracking and doing this assessment. So we're in terms of real time where they are now, knowing the child and the caregivers go up and down and up and down. So in this case, she's telling me I have more stress than I have control. So it's not really a time that I could do what I was hoping to do maybe in that session, to talk about sex abuse or whatever it was. It's a time to really think about, of course, the most important thing, which is I could lose mommy. And then we're going to do everything in our therapy about that. The same girl, when she found out mommy got in the hospital, so you can see her self-control is much higher. But by getting that, we're really getting a quick portrait of where the child is right now, that being the session. But for an assessment, I really want to get in, like you're doing your ecogram, I want to get that emotional ecogram of the child, the youth, and everybody. The most important people. So for Trish, I ask her for grandma, then I would ask her for mom, and then I'm going to ask those questions I put at the bottom here, which are these couple questions. I'm going to have you practice this. So Trish, if grandma was here with us, what would be some of the things she would say she'd like the very, very best about you? And then I want to ask, what are some of the things that grandma would say she's most concerned about you at your age, whatever that is? And then I would say, what would be grandma's greatest wish for you at this age? And what would she think could help you achieve that wish? So it might be to stay out of jail, or to go to college, or to pass, or to come to live with grandma. So this is really, really helpful. So I ask these very simple questions, so that very quickly I'm going to get an eco-map of that child and key caregivers, how the child feels emotionally, what's the level of co-regulation, what's their level of bodily arousal, and how the child sees that caregiver, what the caregiver's message is to them. Now, I mentioned in my example here that, let's say Trish left off dad. So I know dad might be really, really important, and maybe she just never knew her dad. But I certainly want to ask about people who we know are left out, who we know are critical, whether we know from the referral material. Okay. So then I'm going to use this to frame the treatment. So I want to think about, in real life heroes, I use this chart, and I actually adapted this from anybody know trauma systems therapy? You've got a great model that ties in so that the community, the county, everybody, all the county works, everybody, we're using the same treatment model to work together. I've adapted this. The axis, but they use a similar model of 2 axes. But I want to think about just two dimensions here. So we have very little time. I can only focus on a few things. I'm knocking over coffee. So it's together. So with just 2 simple things: circles, thermometers. Thermometers are your level of regulation. The circles are your relationships. I really want to get a sense of what's the strength of the child's emotionally supportive relationships for that child, and what's the level of regulation right now. Now, a very simple thing: low, medium, high, low, medium, high. So I want to think very quickly, what is it we can begin working on? So if I have a child that has a very low level of regulation, they're about to blow, about to throw, about to run out of the room or throw the chair, and also low level of emotional support with anyone, then I'm at low and low. And that's where often we're starting, where we're really thinking about restoring basic safety for everybody, including the adults, including me, right? If you're in a room with a child, or you're in their house, we're thinking about that in our staff. But if we can get to the level of the mediums, and we're thinking about strengthening these things, and if we can get to those 4, just even medium levels there, and we're thinking about reintegration of things that we really want to move forward in terms of reintegration. Real Life Heroes, I want to use this very deliberately to change the structure of what I do in the session. So I know you have a structure for FCT, your sessions, but I'm thinking in Real Life Heroes of a structure for the session, the reason for the structure. And again, a lot of therapists in the country don't like the idea of a structure. They just want to go with the child, make a plan each time. But I think the structure is to create the safety. And I know you have that structure too. These are families that have a lack of safety, kids who feel very chaotic, parents who feel very stressed. So by having a ritualized session structure, and in real life heroes, we have openings, centering, or activities, and we do things from the last storybook and some closings, but I'm going to use the sense of where they are in terms of the circles and thermometers that day to affect what we actually do at the session. Okay, so what I'd like to have you do is to turn to your partner, and what we're going to do is practice doing that, so very quickly, because again, this is a workshop. So everybody has a partner, turn to your person next to you, and hopefully it'll be 2 and 2 and 2. So why don't we start at that end, and then 2. So what I'd like to have you do is ask your other person's the child that you're interested in asking about. The other person is asking the others, and then ask the other person. everybody get a chance to try it? Okay, so I think you get the idea here. I know I have to move along because I'm behind schedule. So, let me stop for a second. Anybody have any reactions about, any thoughts about using this? Yes? Yeah.
Are you then having them story times to write the child, those individuals, or do you?
No. Not at all. Not at all. I really want, and thank you for bringing that up. It's really important. And if they bring up things, I really want to move through. I want to thank them and move through. I'm really interested. And again, I'm working in a very time-limited way. I might have 50 minutes, or as long as I can keep them in the room. You know, as long as I can engage them before they run out or get dissociated or something. For a lot of the kids I was seeing. So maybe I get another time, maybe not. So, so I really want to encourage them, and I also want to. I don't want to get. We're not doing treatment now. I really, and I don't know what level of capacity they're at. I was going to get to that later, in terms of actually dealing with anything. And a lot of some kids will and families will thrust at you the worst thing. Mommy tried to kill herself last night, or 2 years ago. They'll throw that out at you, and this again, why I'm so shocked actually. The kids will come in. One of the reasons I brought my little props here, the bear, the super bear, is to think about not super bear, is to think about what developmental level these big kids are at. I always have some musical instruments, like even a drum, if I can carry that with me. The little xylophone, $20 on Amazon. Which is too expensive for my agency to get, without an NCDSN grant. But anyway, because I want to be able to have expressed it. I have kids come in, see the xylophone, start playing the story of the xylophone of how stepdad would take me to watch him have sex with different people and stuff. And they're off. You know, it's like some kids will come and they'll take off, and then we might feel like, well, now we're going to work on this. But I'm really trying to pull together the resources, the strengths, the vulnerabilities, and I don't know anything. But I'm really just very thankful. So thank you for bringing that up. Any other reactions or thoughts?
I have a question. How do you integrate like the circle, drawing clothes, and the markers? How do you integrate those two?
So I do the circles first, and then I ask. So thinking about whoever they put in the inner circle, especially if they circle them, somebody they can share with the best and worst things of their life. Then I ask them to, I say, so imagine, so if that person was in the room, how would you feel on the thermometers? So that's how I do it in the initial assessment. In sessions, I have everybody fill out the thermometers to begin. That's the first thing, one of the first things we do in the session. I thank them for coming. I do not say, how are you doing? I say, great to see you, let's go. The first thing we do is the thermometers. And most kids will do them. If they don't do thermometers, they can share how they're feeling in other ways. They can make a song, they can make a dance, they can blow balloons, they can blow bubbles. So all kinds of ways to share, but I really want to go nonverbal, to have them share how they're feeling in their bodies within the because we're always thinking relational. We're thinking about relational healing or relational traumas. So if they let me in the door of their house, which is quite an honor, or if they come into my space, wherever I am, McDonald's or wherever it is, the church or the office, then I want to get a sense of how they're feeling in that space. And that's mom and dad too, or anybody I'm seeing. So if the mom or dad are all stressed out, but the child's quite composed, I really need to know that, especially because you got to engage our caregivers. That's the hardest part. Okay. Any other thoughts on that? So now, yes.
Now I forgot what my question was. So I think that I might have lied to my client by accident when I was doing this work. Have you? What is your take on sharing, the circle activity with, a family sharing the circle activity with one another after they've completed, or do you find it more appropriate to keep that more one-on-one?
So I'm very careful about what's shared at the beginning. I want to see the kids alone unless that's forbidden by the parents. and caregivers alone, I want to, because I don't want to see a child and a caregiver and have to share in anything unless it makes sense from the child, that I feel safe with that caregiver and safe enough to share. And I want to know that information. Otherwise, we're working on building that safety, and I want to get to that point with that caregiver. So I wouldn't be sharing with them necessarily until I get to that point. And then I'm very quickly sharing, and in Real Life Heroes, the whole point is to very quickly bring in the caregiver. Unlike TFCBT that was mentioned, I know, and in other programs, many states have mandated that, and they're doing that, where you often work with the caregiver separately. In Real Life Heroes, we really want to try to bring the caregivers and the children as fast as we can together, or for as much as the session we can, maybe only 5 minutes together, or maybe the whole time, or maybe half the time. So at the very beginning of the work, I'm very cautious on encouraging them to share anything with the adults in the room, knowing that there may be a lot of abuse and neglect, and certainly I don't know what's going on. And so I want to mention some of the trauma surveys. NCTSM promotes these really strongly. The screening surveys, which are probably not as relevant for you, but will be relevant for your referral sources. Really simple one-page surveys. This is from my colleagues, Western Michigan University. It's what I like. Very quickly asking them, do you suspect or know about different things? And again, these are on the PowerPoints, so I'm going to skim over this because I'm running out of time. That's what we do it, the case exercise. But just really getting a quick sense within 3 questions. In fact, are there some concerns? There might be trauma, including does the child show mood swings or different types of affect problems, different kinds of behavior problems. And they really want to then have a trauma assessment to try to figure out. I mentioned in my way we want to do is use standardized tools. So I do the circles, I do the thermometers, so I show the child from the very beginning. We're very focused on relationships. And then I do want to use I use the TSCC. Anybody using the trauma symptom? I'm just coming to get that. I'll get to that later, not here. But then I want to use a trauma exposure survey. And the reason I want to bring this up is we have agencies in the NCTSM who they do not have the staff ask kids what they experienced. Because it's very, very hard, even for my agency, which was in NCTSM since 2002, a lot of staff really didn't want to ask. And I had very senior clinicians who would say, you can't do the UCLA PTSD, you can't ask kids about traumas, because that'll traumatize the child. You have to work with the child for a year, and then maybe after the year, the child will, then you could probably bring it up. And so we have to, one of the things we're trying to bring out is that we want to say, I'm a kind of person, we talk to kids about the best things in their lives and the really scary things in their lives, including going through hurricanes, which we all went through, those of us who lived in this part of the world. Fortunately, those of us in Columbia and Charlotte, we were spared, largely, I think, as Columbia was, and but those on the coast really hurt badly. And sex abuse. We want to get that right out there in our introductions. And then I want to say things. I love the UCLA PTSD Index, which you now may be able to access for free as an NCTSM member. They were charging, UCLA was charging for this one. But they were letting us, in the past at least, they let us use it for free as being part of the trauma network. Anybody using this one? Okay, anybody using a trauma survey where we're asking the child what traumas they experience and asking the adults? You are? Okay, which one are you using?
We have ACEs on our.
Okay, and ACE is a start.
Yeah, it's a
It's a limited list. Of course, it was designed for very different. The ACEs list was designed for the public health study about weight. So that's very, but that's a start. So you'll see in CTSM we promote this. The use of instruments like this to really get into what did you experience, and then some of the trauma symptoms. Very short, really quick, gets into events to experience, and some of your basic categories match the DSM-5. Really simple. And then what I want to get into in our very brief time together, there's how do you introduce one of these skills? Because a lot of clinicians are afraid to do it. And I want to bring it up, and I want to bring it in early in the work. So if you have like I was talking about in behavioral health care, we have 3 45-minute sessions to do your whole assessment and contracting. Then by the second session, I don't want to wait, because if you wait, then you've already set a context of what you're doing. We want to show them that we think about traumas from the beginning. And by asking these questions, then the kids and the caregivers share. And there's a caregiver form and there's a child form. And of course, then we're comparing what the kids share. And that's probably the most informing thing for us. If we see that the parent may say, well, there was no problems, or they might list some things, and the child might just tender things. Oftentimes what we see is parents really miss things like loss and death. And the kids are really struck by when grandma died, when grandpa died. And we see developmentally, maybe that's when the family got stuck. So I want to have messages like, this is part of our beginning work. This is just, it's just routine. And we just do this, and then I talk to children about the best things that have happened to them in the hardest times. Anybody have something you say to introduce these kind of things? When you start, because I know you're asking about the traumas.
I tell the kids that I'm going to ask them these questions, but we don't necessarily have to talk about all the details, and that kind of frees them up to feel like you're not going to be interviewed or pressed right now to go into all of it. But if you're honest, that helps me know how I can help you.
Right. So we introduce it, and then we're off. So this is the introduction for the UCLA. It goes like this. Sometimes the people with scary, violent things that happen to them, who could have been or badly hurt or killed. I'm going to ask you some questions about whether anything's happened to you, so you can tell me if they did. And then there are things like accidents or hurricanes or sex, and you go on. And we just go right with it and do that. This is another list. This is from my colleagues at Delphi University now. Dr. Habib, anybody know her work? Sparks, a great trauma model for adolescents, for group work. But this is the trauma history checklist, and your view is free. So if you can't get the UCLA PTSD index, which I think I like better, but this one is really nice. The wording is meant for adolescents, so we want to adapt it. But again, very quickly, we say the same kind of things at the beginning. Something's happened to people, it's extremely upsetting, and they'll do it. So very much what you just said. And then we start with, have you been in a natural disaster like a hurricane? So everybody on the North Carolina coast is going to say yes, and everybody in Columbia, South Carolina says yes. Have you been a terrorist thing? And then you go on, it includes things like sex and fighting in your home and fighting in the community, seeing people hurt, weapons, being stalked. You see the wording here is very much for an older adolescent. But you can tailor that and adapt that for younger children. And then you ask, of all these things, which one's the worst and which one still bothers you. So we very quickly have a sense of what that was. This is the Child PTSD Symptom Scale, also free, that you can download from Dr. Edmund Fole. Anybody using this one? And again, it's very simple and very free. And this then I would do second, because that gets you the symptoms. So the UCLA PTSD Index combines both of this together, exposure and symptoms. The CPSS would be just symptoms. But very short and easy to use. And again, the symptom scales for this and the PTSD, PTSD scales are like, how often does it happen? And no time to really get into practicing it, but and the scales are matched. So this is only like 17 questions. So it's very quick. You get a sense of the level of symptoms the child has. So you have that with you. This is the TSCC, which I really like, which is Okay, so after you read that, ask your partner, think about your partner again, talk about developmental level, and let's see the strengths you see. What might be driving her behaviors. Just think about just from the very beginning. Time's up, Rhonda's here. Because that's the way it works, right? We don't have any time to prepare. So I just want to ask around the room, too. I know I didn't give you much time to look at this. But very quickly, looking at those behaviors, what developmental level are you thinking about? She's 15, so you got a 15-year-old, but she's big. But what developmentally, what are you thinking? Based on just from what you hear, referral information, what are you thinking where she might have gotten stuck? Because we want to focus real quickly about the what happened question, what happened when. So, 3, because we got biting and cursing, right? And running. So those of you who know toddlers, and when you teach your children not to bite. You're 1 year old, right? So, very, very early.
Not like when we told about, that's like the 3-year-olds.
That's right. All right. Okay. Okay, who could, just from this little bit of information, without even meeting them, where would you might look for that emotion? Again, we're thinking relation, we're always thinking brain to brain. Who could be the other brain for Rhonda? Mom. Right, we're always thinking, already thinking about mom. What happened with mom? Anybody else? Your mom can't do it. You don't have that. What? Stepfather, yeah. So we're going to think about that. Anybody else have any other ideas so far?
You gotta do the circles to find out.
Yes, we're gonna do that. We're gonna do that on the next page. Yes. Great. Oh, but, okay, so any initial hypotheses you have just from this, from what might be driving her behavior? She's looking to older young men, meaning like 18, 20, to have sex, and she's fighting with her mom with a knife. So what do you think might be your initial hypotheses we're looking at? Rejection, right, desperately, yeah, and that's right. It's that emptiness. She needs somebody. She needs somebody. Now again, I want to think, and I'm thinking about that developmentally, where she was. I'm going to from the interview and look at that. Right, when I asked her, what would she like to do? I'd like to go to the park and play in the playground. So is a 15-year-old saying this? Unfortunately, the playground is littered, mom says, littered with needles and things like that. And that's it. But she wants to go to the playground with mommy or daddy. So we're thinking about where this broke down. So immediately we're thinking about what broke down by 3, 4, 5, even though we had a 15-year-old in trouble with the police and hospitals in front of her coming. Okay, that's good. And so anything you want to find out next? I like the circles. No, we're going to go with that, definitely.
So one of the things we integrated in the last year and have much more effectively is a timeline, family life cycle process with the parent, because that gives us their own history of trauma significantly, and from there, treatment strategies and opportunity to talk with her, what did they not get, and they blah 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 blah. Eventually give that to your child.
Thank you. And one of the things, if you turn to page 2, maybe we'll do this as a group together, so we're running out of time. I highlighted things that were more important to me. One of the things I love this mother because she was a fighter. She was tough. She had a temper, and she had gone to residential treatment. So she had spent 2 years in residential treatment for JJ because she was very busy. She's a fighter, and I wanted to bring her out as a fighter for her daughter. But one of the things that struck here is this girl, with that hypothesis that she's desperately looking for somebody. So if you read on page 2, some of the things I had to highlight, because I'm just going to go through this since we have all the time. But I'm looking for things that she really likes, and she liked her kitten, it makes her happy. So that's what I'm looking for, what lights up the child, who she take care of, she takes care of her kitten. So that's really a good sign. She can take care of her kitten. She wants her mommy, but she gets in trouble with mommy. She says, I tried to stab my mom. And then you want to know the cycle, and then she shares the cycle of how the file that works. And that's on the 5th paragraph on that page, on this page, the 2nd page, which was, just let you read that cycle as she goes, let you read that. Okay, so from that, even just from that paragraph, what do you think she lived with at age 3 to 5? Because where would she learn all those sexually derogative words and these kind of things? Her neighborhood, could be her neighborhood, yeah. Or even closer, and it goes on. You read below. She talked. They did her mom and dad's fought. Her dad beat her mom beat dad sometimes. There was a lot of fighting and violence. And we see how the cycle goes and how the mom interacts in that cycle, because that's the interactive cycle where you want to get to and try to change. She also heard voices. So I'm going to give you a minute to skim over some of the things that strike you on this, but take a look at the follow-up interview on page 4. They're going to ask you a few more questions. Okay, since we don't have a lot of time, so so you see, part of this, she discloses being sexually touched. She also said she told Laurie Goldman when she was 10, and that's around the time she starts her hospitalizations. She has been, none of this has been addressed in the previous treatment or anything. And the mom says she isn't aware. So she tried to tell her mom. Mom couldn't hear it, didn't hear it, didn't understand it, didn't want to hear it. And she's continued to send her to visits with her dad. So we were submitted on the psych hospitals. And the father says he wanted to kill her. So I was trying to think about, so what strikes you is, what's some things you pick up from this that can help you engage? What?
Just someone validating.
Yeah, validation. Yeah.
Broken trust.
Or what?
Broken trust, like there's no trust.
Right, and broken trust with mom. It goes way back to 3 to 5. Because mom is in a domestic violence relationship, but she really apparently wants this man, even though she didn't know he was a sex abuser. But she keeps him, and the grandfather dies, the mother, and there's fights, and the father's still about it even after they separate.
So setting up a basic sense of safety for her.
Yeah,
Because there's probably not been much safety in her life.
their whole life.
And so what would that look like to feel safe?
Right. Yeah, let me
She
story.
calls the boyfriend a stalker, but he's
Yeah.
a boyfriend.
But it's her boyfriend. Yeah, and she always has somebody there. And she's always thinking somebody's there. She's always looking for the father who's loose and around in an unknown location. Yeah.
And I think going back to what you said earlier, if we're looking at that kind of development, being arrested around that between 2 and 6, and then there's that self-blame at that age that you feel like the events are caused by you.
Right.
And then there's that tug of war in your brain between wanting that person because they're your mom or your dad, and then the chaos that comes because they're also the person that's, in this case, the dad is the person that's the evidence because they're hurting her or being inappropriate with her. So I think also, in addition to things like just providing some of that information to her to kind of get her to understand, why she's feeling the way she's feeling or behaving the way she's behaving. It's very normal under those circumstances.
Very normative. Thank you. And actually, in Real Life Heroes, the first chapter of the life story book is a psychoeducation component. And what was really remarkable, really struck me with this family, was it's written at a 4th, 5th grade level. But it was, I did it with the mom and the girl. We're trying to bring them back together, bring them back to this point where this mother could rebond with this girl and become the fighter to protect her daughter. And which the mother really desperately wants to do. And the mother's desperately afraid about the sex going on with her daughter. She wants to stop that. The interesting thing was, doing the psychoeds, the mother read the stuff about basic trauma and how it works, and at 5th grade level, and she said, she said, I get it. That's my daughter. And she got it, and she really saw that, and she was linked in. And we got the mother, was able to get the mother to change her behavior in the interactive psych. So that when the daughter was triggered, instead of doing what the mother usually did, which was to yell and scream and then threaten to do the hitting and things like that the mother would go with the child and do what the child said helped her.
Strategic apology would be good in this as well.
Yeah.
And also trying to get the mom to get to that place where she could apologize.
Yes, to rebuild, because it's really their life stories together, and mother and daughter coming back together to reunite. And all in the context of losing the death of her father the death of the grandfather was a major blow in his family in terms of destroying safety, and really rebuilding that step together. So, thank you. Any other thing that strikes you about next steps you want to do in terms of assessment, where you want to go? So, but I really appreciate you doing this exercise in terms of thinking about developmentally, and how we work quickly focusing on like this girl's need at developmental level, and mom's need to rebuild a bond from age 3 to 5 when she was lost. But now we got a 15-year-old we're doing it with, and that's the challenge. So we're doing with this kid who he's 15, but acts like 3 to 5. And really wants somebody to love her, desperately to love her and to be available 24/7. So, so I want to think about a couple more things before you go in the last 7 minutes here. This is in terms of complex PTSD. This is from Marilyn Koitra at the National PTSD Center. In terms of what best practice, what seems to work best, seen as working best, is that we deal with the affect dysregulation and the relationships first, and then the desensitization. And again, I'm thinking about that in terms of the trauma thing. So it's really a phased process. So for Rhonda, what phase do you think they're at this point of assessment? The 3-phase process that Marilyn Bush and Julian Ford talk about in terms of when do we got to really focus on the trauma. Phase 1 would be, we're always thinking trauma for everybody, all ages. We always think there may be trauma. Second, we're always thinking if we know there was a traumatic event, we're certainly going to do trauma psychoed, but we may not be able to get further than that in terms of that. We also want to do self-co-regulation that way, self-co-regulation, building for that child to grow the strengths. And the third level would be when they talk about utilities of professors. Direct construction of traumatic memories, reconstruction, that's when you have enough support and capacity for the child and some caregiver. I use the word caregiver, well, because it could be a grandma, grandpa, foster parent, adopted parent, coach, clergy, somebody who can be there with that child to help them experience the past and make sure, and not abandon them, not reject them, to do their story over. So for Rhonda, where do you think we are, given that right now at the beginning of this work I'll share with you? What stage do you think we're at?
The relationship.
Yeah, so we're building a relationship, and we're not really at the third level yet, because they're not together. But we're going to try to get there, and that's going to be the goal of our work, to get to the point where we have a caregiver. I want to get that mom and the stepfather, and then we found out there was an aunt too to bring in, to commit to this child and to work with them, and then we could go forth and do that. So there's a bunch of other assessment tools we have from Real Life Heroes, including strength plans, and we do our safety plans in terms of a strength focus called a power plan, and we do it for the child and the caregiver. I know you're doing that kind of things too. We're really starting with what are your strengths, what you're good at, what you like to do, and then get into what triggers the child, and then how do we change that interactive cycle. So we're thinking about, you're all thinking about that in terms of a family model. So how that reminder leads to the experience of your body, and then that leads to the reenactment, and then more shame, often more shame and more depression, which then sets up the child to do it again. So the power plans are about how we change that, and really want the child to share what works for them, so that the adults will hear it. In Real Life Heroes, we do that in a lot of ways, a little more detailed, like this power plan, but also very short little cards. So we can put that up so that the child can carry it with them. But really what I'm mostly thinking is so that the parent, person, caregiver can be reminded of what the child says helps them. So the emphasis I'm focusing on here is that our privilege here in assessment is really trying to trace often these unspoken lines of caring that we see. This is Rhonda, an actual picture she drew of a happy day. That's her lying in the sand on a beach with her stepfather and her mother. So in therapy, we have a sand tray, we would have to touch and feel the sand, you have to be multi-sensory, or really, that's where we want to go to with that. I want to end with this slide, because I really want to think about these kids like angels. This is a child who drew this picture for me. I was treating person test. But you can see, this one reminded me of Jacob's ladder, the biblical story. So I'm really thinking metaphorically. This is a child. I asked him about this is what he drew, first house tree in person. And so then I asked, what's happening? So what's happening? What happened? What's happening? He says, up and down. And then I said, oh, so what happened before? Like my story, you know? And he says, up and down. And then I asked him, what's going to happen next? Up and down. And then, and that was basically it. Like, you stupid psychologist, that's the story. And that's trauma, because that's how narrow he was. It was literally up, it goes up and down the ladder, up and down. You can see him in his house, standing on what it looks like standing on the door with like barbed wire all around, with the little windows. And here he's up and down, up and down. But I really want to think about that as kids. When they show us, you see him floating, he's got no bases, he's like standing on one leg. We're going to think about these things like a metaphor, like an image. And like the child, in many ways, I think they're like angels. They're like, because they show us. They show us in their behavior usually. They show us what they cannot say in words. And if we follow that like a light, follow that pathway of light to what the child is showing us, the behavior that they're showing us, then often we can see what is the unspoken horror or trauma that has really afflicted the child and the parents and the grandparents and get it to them. But we can tie that in. So I really want to think about, I asked you to think about what your family, so I'm hoping you'll take that worksheet and think about that child or family you're concerned about, and then think about what is it in terms of relationships, emotional regulation, the interactive patterns, the action cycles, and the life story of that child that you can pull out. What is the light that your child and your parents are showing you that we could follow to see where some of the key components driving the behaviors. So thank you for doing this brief remarks.
Some of those of you that are very familiar with the components of FCT, and this one is in context, but we'll have the privilege of enhancing our components of treatment through our training and development with advice, counsel, and some work with Dr. Kagan, which we're excited about, which I'm guessing that we'll be able to integrate some of the tools. But I want you to think bigger picture in the sense of that this was primarily about assessment. And you can think in terms of the current tools that we utilize in the family-centered evaluation, where some of these questions that are tied to the two assessments he shared with us could actually be integrated into the ECOMAP, certainly into the family life cycle, definitely into some of the structured family assessment, and even in some of the solution cards components, if we don't adopt or adapt the two tools that he was sharing. But that's all part of assessment. But towards the end, you were definitely getting into restructuring and putting the family into actually practicing new behaviors with one another around how they meet each other's needs for that safety, particularly in the roles perspective of the parents. So we're doing a lot of this. I think this is beautiful tools to add to our box, but also provides that theoretical framework and the clinical terminology around trauma that we so greatly need. So thank you so much. Thank you all for thinking about that in the big picture of what we're already doing around learning and assessment and restructuring.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it. Thanks,